Chinese are, I'll be blunt. Remember, the Chinese are not friends of the United States any longer. They are, when I say friends, we've been long-term economic partners and trading partners. Our economies are linked more than ever before. This administration, though, has been putting tariffs on them and is threatening even more tariffs. The fact that the Chinese are now going to provide, according to news reports, the HQ-9 air defense system, which, by the way, is far superior to the Russian S-300. I mean, they're going to be giving them, remember, these are defensive weapons. So therefore, even though the administration will be upset about it, they haven't said much yet, but I'm sure they're going to be very distressed about it. But the reality is, giving defensive weapons to another country is something we do all the time. They're not offensive capability, it's defensive capability. And the fact that they are ratcheting up the capability, maybe even to detect F-35s, we don't know yet. This is a game changer. And it's a very, it's behind the scenes nuance that not the average American does not get, and maybe the administration does not get. The Chinese is going to provide these weapons, these defensive weapons to the Iranians soon.
Very interesting point. Okay. So you're saying the HQ-9 is more effective than the S-300, the Russian S-300 yes. that Iran already has. There's yes. reports unconfirmed that Iran may have 1 or 2 S-400s as well. Is the HQ-9 more capable than the S-400?
I believe so. I have to tell you that I'm not a detailed subject matter expert on the S-400. I'm not. However, the HQ-9 is far superior to the S-300.
That is very significant. And that's on top of the Manpads that already, the shoulder-based air defense systems.
Correct.
That can be fired that China's already supplying to Iran, has been and will be supplying more of. Is that significant as well? Are the Manpads that significant? Could they cause a lot of issues for the U.S.?
So, absolutely. Absolutely, they will provide great. I mean, you know how the president has said that we have complete air superiority over Iran? That's already been disproven. We know that's not the case. And it's something where the capability to fire on low-level aircraft and also even fast movers, the Iranians maintain that capability. They cannot destroy every Manpad. That's just not possible. The missile launchers, yes, that's a large footprint, and we can target those. But Manpads, no.
It seems that both countries, you saw all the cargo planes as well flying throughout for days now into the U.S. bases in the region as well, which shows that the U.S. is also preparing for potential return to the conflict. If you add those movements, not sure if you've been keeping track of them, and what we're discussing now with the Chinese exports to Iran, is that just a contingency by both sides in case ceasefire talks fail, or is that more of an expectation they would fail? And leads to my next question is, how prepared is each side to a continuation of the war? Because on the Iranian side, they've been facing very heavy bombardment. You've got also the delegation may have been tracked by Mossad or CIA from Pakistan to India so they could be targeted again. And then on the American and Israeli side, Israel is also suffering on the when it comes to air defenses. There's a report, let me see if I've got it here quickly, that Israel was beginning to struggle before this war ended, similar to what people said during the 12-day war. Let me see where it's at. There it is. So one factor behind Trump's ceasefire decision is Israel taking serious damage. At the start of the war, only 5% of the Iranian missiles were hitting Israel. By the final week, that rate has climbed to 27%, a 400% increase. Now, that could be Israel just intercepting less missiles intentionally, letting some of them land in areas that have limited to no damage, but also the cluster munitions strategy. Either way, Israel can't take a lot more damage, can't sustain a lot more damage, according to some reports. And the Gulf have been hit the hardest after Iran and Lebanon. And their desalination plants haven't really been targeted. The gas fields could be targeted further in Qatar and other countries, causing more issues to the global economy. So twofold question is, are you seeing both sides prepare for a potential return to the conflict, or just more of a precautionary measure? And number two, what would a return to the conflict look like for each side? I know it's a long question.
Yes. However, I took some notes, so I'm going to answer each of those,
Thank you. Beautiful.
Those things. So bottom line up front, your basic question, is there a possibility of returning to armed conflict, significant armed conflict? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, absolutely yes. That's a possibility. In terms of the U.S. aircraft that are coming in, and remember the Iranians are doing the same thing from other sources. They are basically, both sides are rearming and refitting. There are supplies that are desperately needed at the U.S. bases that could not necessarily have been brought in through cargo ships. So we're having to fly in these supplies. So the U.S. absolutely is, I wouldn't call it expanding the capability for war, but we're going to call it enhancing it, and quite frankly, replacing much of the defensive capabilities that were expended already. So that's what's happening. Is there's a normal rearming and refitting going on in the Middle East on all sides. On the third point about the negotiators, I think it would be insanity for Mossad or for anybody to target the negotiators of Iran, because that's just going to make it even far more complicated, far more difficult, and also not indicative of the United States being truthful in trying to negotiate some way out of this. So I would hope that no one would do that. And the last one about the cost of munitions, whether it's Israel, Iran, United States. Last time we talked, I mentioned that 2 years Tomahawks have already been expended. 2 years worth of production of Tomahawks, which amounts to between a quarter and a third of all our Tomahawks. We are expanding production in the United States, but you just can't say, let's go to twice as many per month as we did. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way our assembly lines work. And it will take us many, many months to be able to gear up in any way to replace many of these things. And it will take us a year or more to be able to do it, maybe even 2 years. So I do believe limiting factors are on the United States, they're on Israel, and they're on Iran. I mean, those are the three countries that, quite frankly, we've expended a tremendous amount of munitions already.
What are the limiting factors on Iran beyond the damage that is being caused to their country, their infrastructure, and mainly their military? It's been mostly military targets, not exclusively, but mostly. And also their command and control centers and capabilities. There's reports that Mustafa, the supreme leader, is sending communication to his to other commanders and other people in the IRGC. He's sending that communication via, just written letters that get delivered by hand. So these are reports that have been unconfirmed. So how much damage is Iran sustaining in all this? And could they, because that will give us an idea of how willing they are to return back to go back into conflict to get their concessions.
Okay, so the ability of the Iranians to engage in a coordinated defensive or offensive operation, a high intensity defensive or offensive coordination or operation, are greatly diminished. I mean, like 80-90% diminished. Okay. We should not, however, misinterpret that local air defense, local Manpads, local IRGC forces on the ground, they know what their standing orders are, and they will engage in whatever way is appropriate without necessarily having orders from above. The Russians, they don't operate that way. No one moves a muscle without being approved. But the Iranians are very different. So I believe the ability to still have combat operations defensively and offensively that would wreak havoc on the Middle East or on Israel or the U.S., I still believe that they are strong. They are strong.
You've talked about the H-29s and even the Manpads being delivered by China. So one of my guests was talking about how those, I think it was an Israeli Defense Force guest, and he was talking about how those could be tracked. Israel and the US cannot strike Chinese ships. What they could do is wait for that to be offboarded at the port, and then there they could strike all these stockpiles or these air defense systems as well. This sounds simple to me, but in practice, is it simple to achieve, or is it a lot more difficult?
First of all, it can be done. You won't get them all. It is all about intelligence gathering. It's all about satellite. It's all about signal interpretation. In other words, it's all about the intelligence gathering side of the house. And can those shipments be detected? Whether they're not going to be moving directly from obviously the Arabian Sea, but they could be coming in by the Caspian Sea. They could be coming over land by truck and so on. And you're right, the U.S. would not suit anybody to engage them until they got onto Iranian soil. It would be difficult. It is possible, but they would not get them all.
I'm just trying to imagine what the process will be from leaving the port of, let's say, China, leaving the Chinese port in Shenzhen or whatever, arriving to the port, disembarking at the port, and then moving into position. Where would and it's more of I know it's a very technical question, but from an intelligence perspective, where would be the easiest part to get that information on this is an air defense system being delivered? So is that on they'd be looking at everything being disembarked in Iran, or is it more looking at what is being loaded onto the ships from the Chinese side by satellite? That's the easier one.
Yeah. The loading process. We've got eyes on their ports, and we would know when things, well, with not perfect certainty, but with a high degree of certainty, which ships are carrying which items and so on. But remember that it all depends on quantities. There's also deception there as well, where we might think a particular boxes are of air defense systems, but they're not. So this is not something just as easy as putting an item in a UPS or whatever transit.
We could see the decoy strategy apply again. Before we go back to the embargo that is being applied now, because that's where would be mainly focusing now what the audience wants to hear more about. But just on the decoy strategy, because we may go back into war, so all these things may be being discussed again from a military perspective. You know how everyone's talking about how Iran was using the decoy strategy significantly. We saw images of airplanes being painted on the floor, and then those being struck, and we see that crater in the floor in the middle of a painting. Have you looked into this? I just thought the satellites would be a bit more sophisticated to be able to fall for a decoy. Now, I did see videos where China was actually manufacturing replicas of certain military equipment, becoming inflatable balloons, and those replicas could also be used as decoys. Does the decoy strategy really work that well? Because it just seems such a cheap way for Iran to deplete American stockpiles as well.
So the whole concept of deception is extremely sophisticated. It's not just what happened recently with painting images on a runway or during World War II with creating, as you remember, General Patton was the decoy to be able to say, oh, this is not where the invasion will come from. It's General Patton has this headquarters, and they would have signal intelligence. They would have emissions that would be intercepted by the Germans. They had movement of trucks and ships and everything else to create an image that was where that's where the invasion of Europe was going to happen. So look at this in terms of it, whatever method of deception we might think, expand it by 100 in terms of the emissions that something would give off, the size, the location, or the relative, the signature that it would give, heat. It's extremely complex. There are small devices that are typically used on the battlefield to simulate a battalion operations center or a command and control center to be able to say they're going to target that and not the actual one. Deception is a multi-billion-dollar, should we say, investment by the United States as well as by other countries. So it's just whatever you can imagine, magnify that by 100.
China could be part of that whole deception strategy on the Iranian side, helping Iran, because China would have very similar